Death Valley is the hottest, driest place in the United States.
Soda pop will get so hot, right inside this building, in the shade, it'll blow up.
It's the land of Charles Manson. He picked Death Valley as being a place to hide out for when the apocalypse was going to take place.
Anyone who's going into Death Valley and surviving out there, there's a good chance that they might have a past. It's one of those places people go to eliminate their past.
In late 2003, ranchers and campers around the tiny outpost of Ballarat, California, have begun seeing a strange man alone in the mountains. Soon after, local law enforcement start getting reports of minor robberies around town.
Ballarat is just this little town that had a gold rush back in the 1800s and then evaporated within 50 years. On the map, it actually says remote ghost town. The idea that someone would burglarize a store is just kind of preposterous. To get there, it's hard.
So, that was a shed over there?
Detective Jeff Hollowell of the Inyo County Sheriff's Office is the first investigator assigned to the case.
Early January of 2004, I'd gone out and taken a theft report from the Ballarat store. I believe a quad, a firearm, some cash, and miscellaneous food items were taken. They did leave tire impressions from when they drove out on the quads. They did leave foot impressions. And it's not the type of area that a professional would go after. There's not a lot there monetarily to be stolen.
He just helped himself to a little bit of, there wasn't much food in there. I guess he got a little old motorcycle or something.
He broke into a couple places around here and went back into the hills. And he wanted to hit our place. He wanted it bad because he knew that, you know, with me there would be food there, and that's what he was looking for.
People were getting scared. If you're in that general area, your closest law enforcement can be 3 hours away. A lot of the people actually talked about taking up firearms and arming themselves in case they encountered this subject. We contacted the BLM ranger that's assigned to that area, Terry Allen, and asked him if he had heard any reports of suspicious people in the area.
With tension mounting, Ranger Terry Allen begins searching the rugged terrain around Ballarat.
Terry Allen started seeing a little campsite on the side of the road. Footprints here, maybe. ATV tracks there. And he started tracking him for, I think, 2 or 3 months.
I was out there almost every day, and when I started finding his camps right next to the road, that kind of made me nervous. And I know he saw me. I know he saw me on numerous occasions. What he would do is he would see people drive by, go to the places that they were camping and watch them. And when they would leave their camps, he would sneak down and take food and clothes, whatever he needed at the time. He'd build up quite a bit of supplies.
Now, when you're talking about an area like Death Valley, where one of the major uses of it is for tourists to go in and appreciate this beautiful isolation of nature, and he's taking the only thing that those tourists need to survive, that's a big problem.
Months go by, and the bandit continues to elude capture. He is practically a ghost.
He was almost becoming a folk legend, if you will. People talking about him like he was something great because he had eluded law enforcement for a couple months.
Somebody tagged a name on him, Ballarat Bandit, and they put it on the internet, and it stuck. And that's what they started calling him, that's what the paper started calling him.
That's how the myth got going, the Ballarat Bandit. No one will ever catch him is what it was. The police officers can't catch him and won't catch him.
4 months after the bandit first appeared in Death Valley, investigators have no new leads. Until a group of off-duty Los Angeles police officers, completely unaware of the case, run into a suspicious character.
There's a lot of camping here.
They ran into this individual just sitting there, Thought it was strange. He said he was just out camping. They didn't think that was normal either, to be camping at this spot where there was basically nothing. Sitting on a quad, just packed full of you know, food and equipment, and a rifle right on top with a head of scope on it.
I just don't get too suspicious here, man.
Call it their instincts, whatever it may be, but they were able to determine that he was just not acting right, even for the desert.
One of the officers snaps a picture. After returning home to Los Angeles, he emails the photo to the Inyo County Sheriff's Office. Detective Hollowell knows immediately this is their bandit.
In the photograph, you could see it appeared as though he was trying to camouflage everything he had to stay hidden, stay out of view. We were able to determine that the rifle he had and the quad itself were most likely the ones stolen from the Ballarat store. So now we had an actual lead or a place to start our investigation.
At that point, they knew he was still there, they knew he was armed, and they didn't know what his motives were.
Ranger Allen gets an internet tip about a group coming to visit Barker Ranch, where the Manson family hid out. Knowing that the bandit often targets tourists, he heads to the ranch.
Myself and another ranger, Dave Karlarski, went up there to see if we could run into this gathering.
Though the group never shows, the Rangers make a surprising discovery nearby.
We ran into his tire tracks from his quad. It was real unique tire tracks and easy to pick up. I told Dave that these are the tire tracks of the quad that was stolen by the bandit. And at that time we continued on up the canyon following these tire tracks as far as we could. But you know, I've been tracking for years. It's fairly easy out there to pick up a footprint. Eventually I found some footprints that led off into a little draw and started to follow them, and as I got just down a little bit, I saw a camp. As we moved towards the camp, an individual jumped up and saw us.
Stop, police!
And just immediately took off running.
They got within about 50 feet, and the bandit just got up and sprinted down the mountain.
We chased him for roughly a quarter mile. And we weren't making any ground on him, and we could see that the flat went for another mile or so. And when we watched him run across the flats, he never quit. We quit chasing him, went back to our vehicle, and we could still see him through binoculars still running. He never quit running. My opinion was that he was wanted by somebody, or somebody was chasing, maybe not so much law enforcement, but somebody wanted to get him.
We have a hunt going. We have somebody that seems to be good. What's he doing? Unknown. Why is he doing it? Don't know yet. So, you know, it's like, okay, well, let's see if we can second guess and let's see what we can do to find out what it is that he's up to.
Coming up, the myth and the mystery only deepen as investigators try to track the bandit. Is he just a brazen outlaw, or is there a more sinister agenda in play?
Yeah, let's see if we can find that rifle we saw.
Determined to get a bead on the Ballarat bandit, Rangers return to the campsite where they first encountered the elusive thief. This time, it's full of evidence.
He had everything very well organized. He taped everything closed. Everything was in its place. And he knew what he was doing.
Yeah, that's what we found in that.
Here's a subject that is showing certain survival skills. He would bury his food items, he would bury his trash. He kept enough supplies, usually stolen supplies, that he could abandon a site and still manage fine as far as having food and water, firearms. We decided that this was more than just a desert burglar, more than just your common thief. We knew it was time to go after him.
A few weeks later, a local spots another campsite in a remote area. This time, investigators will take no chances.
In an area like Death Valley, law enforcement is very limited. But when you're talking about the manpower it takes to hunt somebody down here, the only way they could even hope to do that is to all unite. and gather up together, share resources, which is what they did.
Hi, guys. Come on in.
We got together with the BLM Rangers that worked the area and set up a plan to do a ground and air assault in an attempt to locate the Ballarat bandit.
The task force devises a careful strategy.
Helicopter will be coming over the North Ridge as well.
Because of the fact that we knew he had firearms, everybody went in with the impression that this guy was armed and dangerous. We were not going to take chances. Our plan was to hopefully have a ground unit find him, and when he did his usual, which is take off running uphill, we'd be able to get the helicopter above him and actually insert our team to surround it. I believe we spooked him enough that we pushed him out of his normal, comfortable environment. We spent the better part of a day looking for this subject and were never able to locate him.
By now, the bandit knows that he's facing a formidable armada of law enforcement officers, and he decides he's going to get out of Death Valley.
At that point, we sort of lost track of what was taking place. We didn't hear much more about the bandit whatsoever.
After committing 30 burglaries over a 200-mile stretch through Death Valley, the bandit presses on, widening his territory.
The next place the bandit appeared was in Nye County, Nevada, across the state line from Death Valley, over 100 miles away, which is even bigger than the Death Valley area, even more remote in many ways.
Nye County takes up the whole central area of the state of Nevada. It's the second largest county in the United States. We will get new people here in town and find out that they're wanted from other places, and they think they can come to a small community and blend in, and when they don't blend, they stand out because it is a small community.
An unusual call comes into the Nye County Sheriff's Office. A remote ranch in the high desert has been robbed. Among the odd assortment of stolen items, a tractor battery and a little red wagon. Investigators follow the wagon's tracks for 10 miles and discover a campsite and an abandoned Subaru.
We found a whole bunch of weapons, night vision goggles, maps of the area.
In that Subaru were 14 rifles and all kinds of camping supplies.
The weapons, if he needed them to hunt, he needs one, maybe two. He had overabundance, which becomes a concern to safety for law enforcement and other people.
Detective Guthridge runs the car's plates.
And it came back wanted as a stolen vehicle from Death Valley.
Guthridge immediately calls the Inyo County Sheriff's Office to find out more.
I spoke with Detective Jeff Hollowell, and we concluded that we were dealing with the same person that they'd been chasing over there for months, and that this person was highly motivated in escape.
Detective Guthridge comes up with a plan to ambush the bandit's campsite the following morning and catch him off guard.
We went ahead and advanced on the campsite. There was no one there.
As soon as they get to the campsite, they realized that he had just been there. They saw fresh footprints leading away from the site, so they ran after the footprints. They were headed right for the top of this huge mountain.
Nowhere did 2 feet come together to signify that they stopped.
They realized he had run right over the mountain. He had performed this almost superhuman feat.
Usually when I get that close, I get to put handcuffs on somebody. And in this case, he got away. The campsite and the footprints led past markers, which all led me to believe that we were dealing with someone that had some military experience.
Suddenly, investigators realize the mysterious bandit may be far more dangerous than anyone expected. Investigators on the trail of the Ballarat bandit are beginning to suspect that their quarry is actually a highly trained criminal.
I was in the light infantry in the United States Army, and some of the things that we learned were these things that he was demonstrating. There were secondary fighting positions, little scratch out in the earth just to get your body down below the level of the ground that overlooked his campsite.
We believe there was either some person that was ex-military that went off the mark, so to speak, that was, that was a threat. So we sent up additional manpower, in total 30 people, looking for this individual.
But the posse's efforts are in vain. Over the next few months, the bandit remains at large, confounding investigators with his strange taste in loot.
Items that he would take kind of blew them away. One of the things is that he loved to take spices. There was no spice that this guy didn't like. Another odd item that the bandit took from one ranch house was a collection of cassette tapes featuring these old detective stories, indicating that maybe he had a sort of playful sense of this game that was beginning to develop with the law enforcement officers.
And now, from the files of the Texas Rangers, the case called Stick Up. It is early morning, September 6, 1938.
They started really asking themselves, who is this guy? What does he want? What is he doing here?
To answer those questions, investigators from California and Nevada realize they're going to have to join forces. They meet in the heart of the desert and vow to defeat the bandit once and for all.
We were trying to gather information, get all our information together, see if we couldn't figure out who this person was and what he was up to.
All right, this is the map of the area.
They came over here for a meeting, and we sat down. They looked through the stuff that we found at the campsite and identified some of the items from being taken from their area.
But after 6 months and numerous sightings, the bandit's identity remains a mystery. Investigators still don't have a clear profile.
You know, I saw a drawing from somebody else that drew up a picture, a sketch of him, and it didn't look like anything like the one that I had drawn up. So it started making me wonder, do we have the same person here, And I think we are all thinking that. Same person, or maybe there's two of them working together and we just didn't know it. We just weren't sure.
He was an identity thief. He'd actually, whatever you left behind, he would pick up. So if you had size 12 shoes, he became size 12 feet. If you had a small jacket, he'd take a small jacket. If he was a changeling. He became whatever you left behind, and that's what he was.
One of the reasons that the bandit assumed such gigantic proportions in the minds of law enforcement is because he didn't fit into any of the categorizable criminal profiles that they like to use. They thought he was ex-military. Another theory was that he was a lifer in prison who had escaped, or was someone who was facing life in prison and possibly violent. But at the same time, he hadn't committed any acts of violence, and he didn't fit the profiles of any known fugitives. And then finally, he was camping out near military installations, and that ultimately led them to conclude that he could very well be a terrorist.
Once we started looking through some of the items recovered out of the campsites, there was one there it was a military map. So that really increased the pressure to apprehend this subject.
We believed that it may be a terrorist looking to scope an area out, especially after learning that he was in an area that wasn't too far from the China Lake, which is another top-secret military installation.
Not only has the bandit been seen around China Lake Naval Weapons Center, investigators also realize he has several campsites on the outskirts of the notorious Area 51. Whatever the bandit's doing here, he's clearly in the wrong neighborhood. In the wake of the September 11th terrorist attacks, the threat level in the Nevada desert has just gone sky high.
These are some of the most secure facilities in the United States, where some of the most advanced military research takes place. If you're a spy or a terrorist, it would certainly be a major military target.
If we had an opportunity to stop something, whatever intent he had, we're not going to make it an easy target or an easy situation for him in Nye County. I told him, I said, I believe that he's not going to be taken alive. And if he has the opportunity, he'll try to engage you guys in a firefight.
Officers from Nye and Inyo counties begin patrolling the desert day and night. They even enlist the help of the Department of Homeland Security for air support. But once again, the bandit has outsmarted them. He pushes north, stealing 4 vehicles and robbing 3 ranches, until finally he is gone.
He always had to look over his shoulder. If a deer broke a twig, he was probably up moving campgrounds.
With that many resources after you, he had to have wondered if these guys were going to shoot first and ask questions later. Very easily, he could have fallen into an extremely paranoid mindset where they're after me, they're going to kill me, they're going to get me.
What started as a search for a petty thief is now a high-stakes manhunt. The desert has just gotten hotter than usual. After setting off alarm bells by camping near military bases across the desert, the Ballarat bandit has mysteriously vanished. But Ranger Allen's instincts tell him this manhunt is far from over.
I felt eventually he was going to come back to where it all started. If I saw him again, I wasn't going to let him get away. I knew that he'd been chased out of up there, so I started checking his old haunts in our area, and I went up to South Park Canyon again, to one of the cabins where he was originally seen. And as I got up there, I could smell smoke. And so I went up to the cabin, and sure as heck, somebody had been at the cabin. But it had taken off very quickly because on the table there was a half-smoked joint, which was unusual. Obviously, somebody got out of there real fast. The thing with the marijuana really surprised me because out of all the camps, we never found anything to do with marijuana or drugs. It makes no sense.
On patrol a few miles away, Ranger Dave Brenner finds another potential clue.
Just before I came off of the West Side Road, I noticed that there was a vehicle parked up one of the canyons. And I thought that was kind of odd. It's not something you would typically see in July. So I drove up that canyon to check to see what it was. And when I was looking underneath the vehicle, I found a 5-gallon bucket with pot plants in it. And it was unique, little seedlings. You know, you're talking 3 to 5 inches tall of seedlings of marijuana.
Brenner seizes a rifle from an abandoned truck. He also finds a driver's license belonging to the owner of the Subaru stolen months earlier. With no phone service for miles, Brenner has to leave the scene to call for backup.
And that's when I got on the phone and contacted the Sheriff's Department and said, we probably have the bandit back in our area.
But by the time Brenner gets back to the truck, there are clear signs that the bandit had returned.
He had kicked the door shut, which was not on the door before. So now we have a person that's upset, and he left a mark, literally left a mark on the door.
By then, the bandit has returned, seen Brenner had been there. and takes off on an ATV. At that point, we've got another chase going on.
Ranger Brenner follows the bandits' ATV tracks across the desert floor in 124-degree heat.
I'm following the track on the road. The person would get on the road, he'd get off the road. So it was almost like he was trying to lead you away from the highway, but he's coming back to the highway. Previously, whenever he was confronted, he'd always go for high ground. He'd always take an escape route. This time, he's heading south.
Brenner followed the ATV tracks for a distance of about 70 miles.
From that point on, he was running against time.
All the rangers and law enforcement authorities in the Death Valley area know that they are hot on his trail, and they're all looking for him. There was no way that he was going to escape them.
Brenner chases the bandits' tracks through the night without success. The following morning, Ranger Patrick Shields is on his way to work when something catches his eye.
I was coming on duty, and as I came down the highway, I saw an individual laying on the side of the road with a red plastic gas can beside him, right next to a call box. And that's when I had a feeling this person may be the guy we're looking for.
Pat Shields calls in describing this man he sees, and Brenner on the radio says, "That's him, that's the bandit." So he swings around and goes back.
When I got back to the call box, the person was gone.
They know he has to be in that area. He's got the gas can in his hand. He's run out of gas. He's on foot, and there's nothing around there. He has overextended himself.
It was believed at that time he was possibly out of food and out of water, dehydrated, malnourished.
It was probably 110, 115 out, and probably was suffering from heat stroke or heat exhaustion.
I said, this is going to end today. One way or the other, this will end today. And it's one of those feelings you have. You know it's going to happen. You don't know how it's going to end, but you know it's going to end.
They called in the California Highway Patrol, which sent a helicopter, and it spots what looks like a small campsite a couple hundred yards off the highway. And now they know his exact position.
We made an approach to where he was located in the wash, directly in from the highway, and then two officers from above coming down the wash.
They surround the area, and then they start creeping up on the bandits' location. Dave Brenner gets within about 50 yards, and he can actually see the bandit. For the first time in months, a law enforcement authority has eyes on the bandit now.
Someone's in it. Someone's in it.
But fearing that he may lash out when cornered, investigators proceed with extreme caution.
All we're doing is keeping eyeballs on this guy, and if he does anything that would be considered threatening, we would engage. I see that he's got a gun. I let everybody know he's got a gun.
Within a split second of hearing the word gun, I announced, "Police, put your hands up."
And he's surrounded. There's nowhere he's going to go. This is what in the Old West is called the end of the line. The law enforcement has you pinned.
Police, come on with your hands up!
And they prepare to move in.
Within a split second, we heard a rifle shot.
Terry, you got me covered?
I run down to where he's at and I immediately check to see what had happened. And he had shot himself in the head with a rifle. And time sort of freezes.
I got the rifle. It's secured.
The 1,500-mile chase is over. But rangers still don't know who this man was or why he was prowling near military installations. Coming up, it looks like the bandit will elude investigators in death, just as he'd done in life, until a California coroner picks up the case.
I'm pretty arrogant. I'm never going to fail.
Following the dramatic suicide of the Ballarat bandit, rangers are stumped.
We had no idea who the person was, where he came from, or where his family may be, any of that. Without having an identification on him, it was anyone's guess.
Nor can they find any clues hinting at the bandit's motives.
When he died, he took off all his clothes. He stripped off everything that he had been. He died the way he came into the world. All the identities, all the layers of identity that he had assumed, he had taken off, and he became himself again.
The rangers turned to the San Bernardino coroner's office for help.
The case was given to a deputy coroner named David Van Norman, who specializes in finding unidentified remains.
We obtained a set of fingerprints. When that was run, the fingerprints were found to have no matches within California. And so the next step was to go into comparison with Western states, no match again, and then into the FBI. And surprisingly, again, no match. I had noticed that there was a tattoo on his shoulder of Harley Davidson emblem. It appeared to me to have been done by an amateur. And frequently, that indicates that it's something that was done in a prison environment. And it was surprising that we would have an individual who had this type of tattoo and not have fingerprints on file anywhere.
Even in death, he still escaped them because they couldn't identify him. It became his obsession, really, to find out who this guy was.
I'm pretty arrogant. I'm never going to fail. These individuals are under my care, and it's my personal responsibility to identify them so that they can go home.
But nearly a year goes by, and the bandit still doesn't have a name.
He was designated John Doe number 39-04, and that means he was the 39th unidentified male for the year 2004.
Finally, in an act of desperation, Van Norman decides to send out a mass email saying, "Does anyone know who this guy is?" It had a picture of his face in death, and he got a response.
An email was received by our office, and it went, I'm sure that you guys already thought of this, but just in case, here are my 2 cents worth. Who talks like an American, looks like an American, acts like an American, but isn't American? A Canadian. Maybe the bandit is a Canadian. They are all over the desert, especially in the winter.
Van Norman submits the bandit's prints and dental records to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and waits. 4 months go by with no answer. Then, finally, they hit the jackpot.
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police actually entered his fingerprints into a national database, and he was considered a parolee at large out of Canada.
Coroner Van Norman is contacted with the results.
They had a possible match for John Doe number 39. The person that they were referring to was George Johnston.
The Ballarat bandit was a Canadian from Charlottetown, which is the capital of Prince Edward Island, which couldn't be more different from Death Valley or Nevada than any other place.
When an identification is made, there's this quarter second of absolute elation. And that's followed immediately by a crashing sensation. It's almost hard for us to breathe until we can contact the family and make the notification.
Investigators have finally given the bandit a name. Now, they're determined to find out what drove him to Death Valley. The story they uncover is stranger than anyone could have predicted. Investigators learn that before appearing in Death Valley, George Robert Johnston, known as Rob to his friends and family, lived an itinerant lifestyle with his wife Tommy and 4 daughters.
We met in Ontario. I had just turned 19. Rob was 31 and a drywaller, very good at his job and very full of himself. I think we stayed together probably the first weekend we were together, and we were apart a week after that, and then never again.
That was one of the most surprising things the law enforcement authorities later found out. They had suspected him of being a complete loner, but clearly at one time in his life, he had had this strong family group.
It seemed for a lot of years that we were waiting to have a life. When we got to the perfect spot with the perfect job, then we'd settled down, and I don't think he knew exactly what he was looking for in the way of perfection. The closest we got was the desert. He liked that romantic mystique where a man was a man and a woman was a woman and a handshake meant something. You know, he wanted to be independent always and just at everybody's sight.
After years of traveling under the radar, Tommy was diagnosed with leukemia, and the family finally settled down on Prince Edward Island. To make ends meet, Rob began growing marijuana, but the plan backfired.
Johnston was arrested. He copped a plea deal, was sentenced to a few years in prison. He only ended up serving over 1.5 years, but it was enough to drive him absolutely mad.
He fell apart. I think that was the end of Rob, right with that arrest. He wouldn't see the kids for months. After that, he really felt that he just ruined us. It was horrible. I think he had a nervous breakdown probably in the first couple of weeks that he was in there, and he was never the same again.
When he was released, he decided that he had to heal himself, that he needed to do this on his own. So one day he told his family that he was leaving, that he was going to go south into the States and try to get his head straight, and that he would come back once he did. And that was the last they ever saw of him.
When word from the coroner's office finally reaches Tommy and her daughters, they are devastated.
It was 18 months before they identified him after his end in the desert. You know, you just have this image of here's just this guy they can't catch, and they've got helicopters and airplanes and trackers and horses and FBI, and, you know, in the end, what does it come down to? Just some crazy fella running around in the desert who thinks God's after him.
The thoughts crossed our mind. Was he ill? Was he fatigued? Was he just tired? Having spent as much time in the freedom and in the wild, if you will, in the desert and in the mountains, running, maybe the thought of being confined in a small cell was more than he was willing to consider.
I would think that his crimes were fairly on the minor side, and that to just give up would have been the way to do it instead of ending it the way he did, unless he just had some real adverse thing about going back to jail. You know, his freedom, he was free. He was out, if you see this country, it's vast, you're free. Didn't want to go back to jail.
I don't know if he went crazy. I know that he always had to look over his shoulder, starting from Death Valley, through Nye County, to Washoe County, and back to the Death Valley area again, where he died. Never had someone run that hard before.
Why didn't they go out there and try to help him? You know, obviously something's wrong with him. He's scared and running from something. He was scared and running from them. He maybe could run far and fast and do all kinds of great things, but he was just scared. Back to jail again? I don't think so. Don't make a man run.
I sit back and I look at the people that are out here. You care a little bit more about them, and you realize that this person was screaming for help, and no one was hearing it. And I look at that anytime I run into something now that's sort of out of the ordinary. It's almost a call for help, and we're there. How do we intervene in that situation, or how can we help that person?
Johnston lies buried in an unmarked grave inside the San Bernardino County Potters Cemetery, under the care of Dave Van Norman.
Sometimes I wonder if he's not right where he wants to be, in the desert, in the potter's grave, very romantic. But it's not good enough for us. We'd like to have him home.
Rob's family is still trying to raise the money to have his body exhumed and flown back to Canada for a proper burial.
It's a story of a man who wound up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Had 9/11 never occurred and the country wasn't so worried about terrorists, he would have been just an outlaw. But now he became a terrorist. And that elevated him and elevated the pursuit to such a level that it was ultimately damaging.
My husband was George Robert Johnston. He wasn't a Ballarat bandit. He wasn't a terrorist. He was my husband, the father of my 4 daughters, and he was real.